Hi everybody, I'm Sid. Welcome back to our channel. Mackie is not here today because tonight is all about me. No, just kidding. He's actually going to be in the live chat answering questions as well. If you caught our premiere last week, you heard all about his story of how he became a pro mountain biker. And we were going to do these together, but we realized we actually have really different paths to the same, different but converging paths. So we figured we would make it 2 videos and we would do them both as premieres. A word on premiere before I get started here. This is sort of a live video, but not really. I'm recording this beforehand, and we're doing that for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, then we can show you all these awesome, hilarious photos from our childhood and our journey to becoming pro mountain bikers that we wouldn't be able to show you on a live. And secondly, our internet sucks here in New Mexico. So honestly, doing a live where we could actually have like a real conversation and it wouldn't be like totally choppy and terrible, kind of out of the question right now. So the way a premiere works is basically like a live video in that there's a live chat, there's super chat, all that is right there. The only thing that isn't live is me. However, Mackie and I will be in the comments, so you can put your questions, commentary, critique, you can put all of that in the live chat, just like you could as a live, and we'll see it and we'll try to get back to you. Alright, so before I started, I just want to make a quick announcement about this video and Patreon. So our Patreon team chose this video and the last one. They wanted to know how we got here, how we became pro mountain bikers. So they chose this video. And if you want to be part of choosing future videos, get on over to Patreon. We are shooting to hit 310 patrons by the end of the year. And the reason we're shooting for that is that we started our Patreon on February 24th, which Mackie calculated is 310 days before the end of the year. Only Mackie would be able to figure that out. He's weird. Anyway, so our goal is to hit an average of 1 patron a day for the whole year, which would be nuts. So that's 310 patrons. If we hit that by the end of the year, we will do a custom sticker for everyone who is part of our Patreon on December 31st. I don't know what it's gonna be yet, but pretty much guarantee it will be awesome, probably more awesome. So if you're not already part of Patreon, head on over there. We would love to have you there, and we're pretty excited about stuff that is coming up. So let's jump into this video and talk about how I got to where I am right now. You notice I am wearing headphones. That's because I'm currently in the basement recording this instead of in the van, and there's a heater and some other weird noises. So hopefully by doing our audio through the computer, it will suck a little bit less. I am not in the van because it's freezing cold right now, and we are currently at Mackie's parents' house in Taos, New Mexico. As many of you know, we got married a week and a half ago, so we are still hanging out with family and recovering from what was a really awesome wedding weekend, but also really exhausting. So that's where we're at right now. Let's talk about 27 years ago when I started riding bikes. I was born into a bike family, you could say, and started riding bikes pretty much as soon as I left the womb. So I was bundled up into a little buggy. What are those things called? That was attached to the back of my parents' bike, and they would ride around. Sometimes they'd ride the tandem with me in the buggy. Super cute, I know. And they would ride that around, and sometimes my dad would just pull me in the buggy. So before I ever rode my own bike, I was already riding bikes pretty much as soon as I was alive. I don't remember much about riding in the buggy, but there are lots of wonderful photos which my parents have kindly dug up for the sake of embarrassing me on the internet. So hope you guys all enjoy that. If any of you were carted around as a kid in one of these or have carted your kids around, please let us know in the chat. I think it's a pretty awesome way to start. You'll see in this one picture, I am carrying my stuffed animal around. You know, I would read books back there, sing songs, just like pretty much do whatever I wanted while being pulled around, usually through the rain because I grew up in Ohio. I don't actually remember my first bike. I think it was probably this tricycle that we have photos of that I would ride around the garage. I don't know if that really counts as a real bike. I also don't remember learning how to ride a bike. I think I was just really young and I don't remember that. I do remember being put on my dad's handlebars once I outgrew the buggy concept. My dad created this ridiculous little setup where I could sit on the top tube of his bike. I think that's what's going on there. And I had little foot pegs and I could hold onto the handlebars like this and we would ride all over the place like that. I don't remember if I had a saddle or if I was just, presumably there was something on there, otherwise that wouldn't be very comfortable. But I remember we went all over like this. My parents did a lot of road biking at this point and like touring on the road. And every year we would do a tour called Tour of the Hocking River in Ohio. And it was like 60 miles the first day and maybe 40 or something back the next day, all out to a campground, and everyone would camp there and eat good food. And that was sort of like some of my earliest bike experiences. I remember really loving it as a kid. That's where this photo in the tent comes from. And I think I first did that in the buggy, and then later I did it on the tandem with my dad. So that was sort of my first introduction to like actually pedaling my own bike, was when my dad put me on the tandem with him. I think in this photo, I was always like a really tall kid. Shocker. So I'm guessing I'm probably 5 or 6 here. He had to put crank extenders on, and I don't really remember exactly how that worked, but it meant I could ride the tandem with him even though my legs were not long enough. So, and I remember we did the full tour thing on the tour that I was just talking about on the tandem when I was in, I think, first grade, because I remember the teacher put up a little sign in the classroom that said, Sydney rode 100 miles on her bike this weekend, which was not entirely true because my dad did like 90% of the pedaling and I was just kind of there. But I did sit on the bike for 100 miles in first grade. So that hopefully counts for something these days. I don't know. And I think having this ability to ride on the tandem with my dad was pretty awesome because I could basically actually go places. And I think like as a little kid with your own leg power, you could kind of just like go in circles around the neighborhood, which I did a lot of, not in our neighborhood because we lived in the middle of nowhere, there was no neighborhood, but I remember loved going camping and like jetting around the campground, usually like in a onesie, as there's some photographic proof of that. But on the tandem, I was actually able to like go out on a Sunday with my dad and like ride 40, 50 miles. And like I said, I wasn't doing that much work, but I got to really fall in love with bikes and the places that they can take you. And pretty much all of our trips as a family involved some bike riding. You know, we took the tandem to Maine and this is a road tandem, and did like road rides in Arcadia National Park and just all sorts of cool adventures on a bike before I was actually riding that much on my own. My dad would also usually pick me up at the bus stop on his bike, and then I would ride on his shoulders. That's what this photo is of. And I wanted to include this photo particularly because my dad's on a Jamis, and this is probably like 1996 would be my guess. I think I was in 3rd grade. I was gigantic, but I remember the haircut, so I'm pretty sure it was 3rd grade. And I just think it's like super rad that my dad had a Jamis back in the day that none of us remembered until we found this photo. And I was like, that's awesome. So yeah, started young. So basically my childhood was full of bikes and bike adventures, mainly road bikes when I was a younger kid, but as I started riding my own bike, it was about around the time that my dad started getting really into mountain biking. Hold on, I'm gonna check this. See this recording. Yeah, so this was about when my dad started getting more into mountain biking. This is like mid 90s, so early adopters. And I remember as a kid, like we would go camping and I had this tiny little green mountain bike and I would try to like ride over big obstacles like twigs. But I remember it being really fun and entertaining. And I think that pretty much entertained me for most of our camping trips were these early forays into mountain biking. Not really on trails, not really with the intention or the idea of mountain biking, but I think the concept is kind of the same. I was a kid with a bike trying to see what I could do on the bike, and that is pretty much what I am today. So basically nothing has changed. I could pretty much just stop this now, but I will bring you through the intervening 20 years. So I remember very clearly my first time mountain biking. I wasn't able to find any photos from that particular adventure, but I know it was at, I think, Lake Hope State Park in Ohio, which is about half an hour from where I grew up. And I fell over pretty much constantly. So, but I also remember that night that I just like dreamed about mountain biking, about riding my bike on a trail. I think I had recently started to ride with clipless pedals. I was 12 or 13. So the combination of those two things, first time mountain biking on a trail and just getting into the clipless pedals, resulted in a lot of falling down. I don't know how many of you watching this right now ride with clipless, but if you do, you probably have some entertaining stories from learning to ride, because there is a learning curve for sure. Now it's been so long, like I said, I was 12 or 13 when I was learning, so I don't think about it. I don't have any trouble getting on my pedals. It's not a problem, but I do remember those first few mountain bike rides. I would try to grab onto trees so I didn't have to unclip, and sometimes the trees would be bendy and the tree and I would fall over. Remember doing a lot of that. So I was probably in 7th or 8th grade when I started doing some real, in quotes, mountain biking. I think I did my first race possibly in the summer after I was in 8th grade, so I would have been 14. I don't remember much other than that I dropped my chain and couldn't get it back on, so I was hiking and then my mom caught up to me. It was really embarrassing. My mom caught up to me and helped me put my chain back on so that I could finish the race. And then about at that point, I was getting really into running. I ran competitively in high school and considered doing so in college, but didn't due to some injuries. So I was not that into mountain biking when I was in high school. It was kind of like what my family did and like all my friends didn't. So this was before NICA. Are there any NICA kids in the live chat? Like, give me a thumbs up emoji or something, because like NICA is so freaking rad, and I cannot imagine like what it would have been like if I'd had that as an option in high school. And I don't think there's a NICA team yet in Ohio, and I think that's really, it's really a shame because there's some awesome mountain biking there, especially XC mountain biking, and I think it would have been really cool to have been able to do that as a kid. As it was, I ran track and cross country very seriously, kind of didn't get into mountain biking. I was worried about hurting myself. And like I said, my friends weren't doing it, so it just wasn't that cool. However, in the summers with my family, we'd go mountain biking like we did. We'd go to, maybe some of you know these places, Douthat State Park in Virginia, SYD Fork area in West Virginia. This is where Snowshoe is, but we didn't ride downhill trails at that period of time. But yeah, we could go all over West Virginia and Virginia to mountain bike. And after my sophomore year of high school, I got my first real mountain bike, which was a Gary Fisher Excalibur. And this was a pretty sweet bike at the time. I think I was a little spoiled because my dad really wanted me to get into riding mountain bikes. So he was like, bought me a nice bike that I, for a while, like did not ride all the time. But I do think that having that nicer bike and like getting into it, it looks ridiculous now. Now that I look at the pictures, I'm like, what was going on with this bike? But I loved this bike because it was gray with this silvery orange paint, and it was pretty awesome. It was a hardtail 29er. This was 2007, so this was really early on the 29er thing. I remember I did like a small local race and some dude came up to me and be like, "You're the first woman I've ever seen on a 29er." And I was like, huh, that's funny. Now everybody has 29ers, but then it was kind of a new thing. This bike was sweet. I loved it. I did a few more races while I was in high school, just during the summer. I was like never prepared, never trained. I was always pretty fit because I was running, but I just like didn't have a very good mountain bike skill set. So I remember really suffering through some races. I think there's a photo here somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, this photo is from the first mountain bike race that I remember. And I remember that it was so wet. It just poured in like epic thunder and lightning storm, like got super dark. This is also at Lake Hope in Ohio. I don't know if any of you have ridden there. It's really fun. And it was a good place to learn for sure. Anyway, so I think this photo is hilarious for a few reasons. For starters, you will see that helmet in all of the photos for like the next, let's see if this was 2008 or 2007. Yeah, these are gonna, that helmet will be in all the photos for the next 7 years. Until 2013 when Mackie gave me a helmet, which we'll get to shortly. So things have changed a little bit in terms of how long I kept my gear alive. I don't think I never really fell in love with mountain bike racing when I was doing it in Ohio in the summer. I think I really loved riding, but the races were really uniquely miserable. These were all XC races. They were probably like 15 to 20 miles long on loops. And it was always in the summer and it was so hot and humid. Like I just remember some where it was like, you were just dying like the entire time. And it just like wasn't very fun. So I was kind of like, meh, whatever. Like I said, I was really into running. I was kind of like iffy on mountain biking. I did it. I enjoyed riding. I liked going places with my family and riding. I just like wasn't that sold on the racing. I also, and I forgot to mention this earlier, I did dabble with some bike polo. There was a very big bike polo scene in Athens, Ohio in the mid to early 2000s. As you can see from this photo, it will circle me. I am hiding off in the corner because I was pretty bad at bike polo and pretty scared of getting smacked in the face with a racket or a club or whatever you call them. But I do remember every now and then I would like, someone would like hit the ball way where they didn't want to go and I'd be able to get to it because I wasn't in the crowd and smack it, and it was like super satisfying. So I think I could get into bike polo again now if I were somewhere that had a team and that did that, because it was really fun, even if you weren't really participating. Yeah, so pretty much that is my mountain bike story through high school. Then I took a brief hiatus from mountain biking. I went to, after I graduated from high school, I went to Spain for 5 months. I was pretty done with like school stuff and wanted a little break before I went to school. I ended up working on a farm in northern Spain, basically just working in exchange for room and board. And they had an old, like, ancient mountain bike with like brakes that didn't even work that I would ride into town. And I remember, I think at that point I was thinking like maybe I'll get into like bike touring. You know, I met a guy who was like doing the Camino de Santiago on a bike, and I was like, that's really cool, like maybe that's what I'll get into. So that was kind of like where my head was at. I thought I was gonna run track in college. However, when I got to college, it became clear that like I was pretty burnt out on running. I had some foot issues. I ended up not trying out for the track team. I had been recruited for cross country, but not for track, and then I took a semester off, and it was kind of complicated. I started riding my bike a lot more. I was up in college at Middlebury in Vermont. This is how I met MACKY and some other friends that I still have today. Was riding bikes in college, and I got convinced, I think by MACKY, this was long before we started dating, but to give collegiate mountain bike racing a try. So this was ended up being pretty humorous. My first season racing collegiate mountain biking. I was decently in shape and like decently good at riding a bike, but I had no clue how to keep my bike in like working order. I'm pretty sure I ended up DNFing 2 races because of broken chains that I couldn't fix. I remember one, I like fixed it and apparently did a terrible job because I made it like 10 more feet and it broke again. So I didn't finish that race. I did have a lot of fun that season though. This I think is one of my favorite photos from that. This is me and my friend Sid. Yes, we have the same name. We were the only women on the mountain bike team, and we were both named Sid, which is statistically probably really unlikely. So she went by Sid 26 and I went by Sid 29, and we still do to this day, even though she now rides 27.5 wheels. But this was from a race we did as a team where I did the climb and she did the descent. And I think we did win the women's category. I'm not sure there were any other women, but we had a really good time. It was like way more partying than actual racing. I remember once we fit, I think like 8 people into a hotel room with a keg. It was a good time. Collegiate racing is pretty fun. So that summer, like I said, this is when I met MACKY. We became really good friends. We were not dating at all for this period. And I think somewhere in there, MACKY and some of the other guys convinced me that I should try road racing. Okay, I had literally ridden a road bike once, and that was to do a triathlon that I did the summer after I graduated from high school. And that road bike was my dad's Trek Madone. So it was probably like, he's 6'3", so it was like definitely too big, but it was like super light, so I rode it anyway. And I know nothing about road racing, so I went and bought a Rocky Mountain cyclocross bike because I was like, well, then I can do road racing and cyclocross. And like, frankly, this bike was kind of a dud. It like didn't fit me that well. It was like really heavy for a road bike. Anyway, I loved it though, you know, I did. In retrospect, I was like, that was an awful bike, but I loved it. I signed up to race collegiate road in the women's C category, and I was awful. I didn't understand. I did okay in like time trials, but I just didn't understand road racing tactics at all, and there was a lot of like really sketchy riding going on in the women's C field, so like people were crashing all over the place, and I was like, I don't know about this, but I did have the best socks of anyone in the field. I think I wore these in every road race that I did. And I also had some mad roller skills. I think I spent more time, and because mind you, we went to school in Vermont, so it was cold and freezing like 90% of the time. So pretty much all the training we did was on rollers. So I got really good on rollers, and I, instead of like doing intervals or anything, I like practiced like dressing and undressing while riding the rollers. I got really good at it. I don't know if I could still do it, but it was a pretty cool party trick. Collegiate road racing was also a really good way to meet guys. As you can tell from some of these photos, you might recognize one of the guys on the bottom here. I don't know what's worse about this photo, the whole thing or the fact that I was just wearing those pants yesterday. So I guess nothing changes. Also, by the way, I should probably touch on the fact that like I had short hair for like most of my life until the last 3 years. So if I'm sure there's gonna be like a million comments about hair, please let me know what you think. Some of these hairdos were really, really terrible. Anyway, so this photo, this is Mackie and our friend Nate, who actually came to our wedding a week and a half ago. So collegiate road racing friends for life. Again, I was a terrible road racer, like really, really bad. But I had fun. This is around the period where Mackie and I got together. I think that previous photo on the couch is probably the first recorded photo of the two of us. So there you go. Anyway, we had a lot of fun racing road bikes, and I wore ridiculous clothing when I was in college. While I was racing road, I think this was because that bike did not fit me very well. It was a little big, I was a little stretched out. I didn't really train. I definitely didn't do any gym work. I was like, just like pretty much jumped right into like racing. I ended up with some very bad nerve pain in my shoulders, and it's something that I think we've talked about a little bit on this channel. I still deal with to this day. However, it was really, really bad that year. And I ended up having to take several months off of riding and like pretty much doing anything and do a ton of PT. And like I said, it never really got sorted out. However, I think that was kind of a impetus for me to actually get in shape and train and actually try bike racing. So that summer I worked at a bike shop and I ended up getting a better mountain bike. It was a Trek Hi-Fi. Again, I adored this bike, and in retrospect, I'm like, that thing was a tank for an XC bike. But started training, full suspension. It's definitely an advantage for some of the racing in Vermont. That summer, I took this bike and went out and visited Mackie in New Mexico. That was the first time I went to New Mexico, and the first time I ever rode at Angel Fire Bike Park, and the first time I ever wore a full face helmet. So summer of 2011, big year, or big summer. And then that fall, I returned to Middlebury and actually gave collegiate racing a go. Yes, this was the period of time when I wore jorts to ride my bike and no socks and thought I was super cool. I don't know what it was with the no socks. Gross. What was I thinking? So collegiate racing that year, I think I ended up winning every race in the Eastern Collegiate Conference. Pretty much, I think this picture sums it all up. I rode by myself for every race, and it rained for every single race. And I remember, I think the race this photo is from, I had had the same tires since I got the bike, which to me, like my previous bike, I had the same tires for 7 years probably. So I was like, what's going on here? But I actually started riding more. So I had completely bald tires for this race. And Mackie had come back because he had graduated from school already, and he'd come back to watch, and he was like, we have to get you some more tires. Like, I was like spinning out in the mud constantly. So I think he hooked me up with some new tires and racing a little bit better. I was the Eastern Collegiate champ that season, and that meant I got to go to nationals, which were actually in Angel Fire. So these photos are from my first ever race in Angel Fire, October of 2011. It snowed 6 inches before this race. We started in mud ruts. I did not have the clothing for this at all. It was an experience. I don't think I'd ever ridden, much less raced, in the kind of icy, muddy conditions. It'd been muddy all season, so that probably was a bit of an advantage, but it was so snowy. So I think I ended up being maybe 11th in the XC at nationals and 7th in short track. So I was like pretty stoked with that. I think that was definitely like, and this is all cross country, by the way, I definitely did not touch any downhill or enduro kind of stuff for still several more years. This was definitely the start of mountain bike racing for me. I really had a good time with collegiate racing. If you're in college and have the opportunity to be on a collegiate team or start a collegiate team, you know, I think this season there were only like 3 of us, but we still had a blast and really good time. So you don't need tons of people to race collegiate. You just need like maybe a car and a bike, and you can go to some collegiate races, and they are so fun. Okay, for those of you who are just tuning in now, this is a premiere, not a live stream. So the distinction there is that this is a pre-recorded video, but the chat is live, and Mackie and I are both in the chat answering questions. So the reason we're doing this as a premiere and not as a live stream is that our internet sucks, as you know, if you've been following us for a while. So keep chatting in the chat, but if I don't answer you, that's because I'm not really here. But I'm in it's confusing, but I'm in the chat, so it's sort of like a Inception thing, basically. But yeah, it pretty much works like a normal live stream. The chat works, super chat works, but I can't respond to you because I'm not there. Okay, so the next year I studied abroad in Argentina. As you can see, bike racing definitely was not yet my focus, otherwise I probably wouldn't have gone to Argentina for 9 months. Mackie and I actually went down to South America together for, I think, 8 weeks or so before I started my study abroad program. And I brought we both brought bikes, and we did an awesome marathon distance XC race called the Conquista Volcán Osorno, which is in Osorno, Chile. And it goes around a Volcán Osorno. It goes around the volcano. And I think it was 50 miles. And oh my God, we practiced the loop. And like, I died so badly. Like, I think it took us 9 hours. I was like, there's no way I can do this. What am I thinking? Like, again, no training. But I did it anyway. Ended up doing it in like, I think maybe 5.5 hours. So once I was actually in race mode, I did a lot less stopping and bonking, and I just had a really, really good time. And I remember thinking like, okay, like maybe like marathon distance stuff, like maybe this is something that I can do. So that semester I was in Argentina for 8 months, and I ended up making a ton of really wonderful friends there through bikes, which was really cool. I think as an exchange student, it would have been really hard otherwise to make local friends just like through school because of how things were set up. But I got adopted by a crew of mountain bikers like instantly, because mountain biking is universal. And we would do these rides, like we barely ever made it to trails. I was living in Cordoba, which is not a huge city, but like big enough that like you're talking, it was like a half hour of, maybe 45 minutes to an hour of really harrowing traffic to get anywhere. But then when we did get somewhere, we'd get out on these like beautiful dirt roads, sometimes double track, sometimes a little bit of single track, and we'd do long rides, like sometimes as much as like 100 kilometers. And a lot of that being on road, and a lot of that like nearly getting run over by taxis and buses. And did a lot of stopping for pastries. So I started training a little bit this year. I ended up coming back to the US in August. This would be 2012 at this point, and a few weeks after, or maybe just like a week after getting back, I raced my first Downeyville Classic. It was an unqualified disaster. This is my first like non-collegiate, like legit race, and I thought I was gonna like do awesome, and I did not do awesome. I think I raced expert, and I like survived the cross country. And then the downhill day, like I thought I was like good at riding a bike, and I wasn't bad, but I was pretty bad, and I just got absolutely smashed, like absolutely smashed myself right towards the top. And I remember being really, I think honestly like this race almost ended my pro racing career before it started, because it was so terrible, and I was like, I'm never gonna be good at this, I'm never doing it again. And somehow the next year I did Downeyville again, and then I did it the year after that. And this past year I did it, and I raced it as a pro, and I was 7th. So, and while that's not like an insanely good result, like there's a lot of progress there in the past 6 years, and a lot of history with that event. So I think from starting from there, I'll just sort of see like how did I get from being this person who was pretty much dead last in expert at Downeyville, like not just dead last, but like couldn't handle the terrain kind of last, you know, like I was so outclassed, like I had no idea what I was doing. That, I mean, that was hard, right? But I think I was pretty resilient, and while I was upset about that race for a bit, I forgot about it. And the next year, 2013, I did my first Enduro, which was also at Angel Fire. So a lot of history with Angel Fire. I think I was second in the amateur women's category. This was one of the first big mountain Enduros. So this was, yeah, kind of the beginning of Enduro. As you can see from this photo, I'm riding a bike that I borrowed from MACKY. I'm like fully wearing XC gear plus baggies, so guess that makes it Enduro. And yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but I had a really good time. Also in this photo, like one of my pack straps is like definitely like all the way twisted around, so yeah, pretty much hot mess. But I didn't really have an Enduro bike. I was still riding a Trek Superfly. I did a little bit of racing that year, but like I was still in school. I still wasn't that into it. I was like, oh, Enduro racing is cool. Like maybe I'll do that next year. So next year, 2014, I graduated from college in December of 2013, and MACKY really wanted to go to New Zealand. So we decided, and like, keep in mind we had like no money, but we're like, I think we can, you know, make it work. We can go to New Zealand for a few months and like live really on the cheap, live out of our car. And I was like really a little naive and idealistic. I think I was like, I'm gonna like go to New Zealand for the winter where it's summer in New Zealand, and I'm gonna ride my bike every day, and I'm gonna get good at riding bikes. And I think I definitely thought, I was like, this will only take, you know, a few months, right? Like, what is there to learn? Like, obviously I'll pick up on it pretty quickly. Yeah, so that year I got a Pivot Mach 6, which was definitely my first real bike. MACKY was racing for Pivot at this time, and I was able to get a pro deal through them, which made that affordable. What a sick bike. It was amazing. It made a huge, just having a bike that was decent made a huge difference in my skills, like right off the bat. That said, I had a lot to learn, and I definitely had an inflated view of how good I was on a mountain bike. So I signed up for pro because I had raced amateur the year before. I'd been second. I'd only done one race, but whatever. And the thing I hated the most about that race, and that I still hate the most about enduro, to be honest, is that we ended up waiting as the amateur women forever to actually be able to drop. And I was like, oh, I know how to fix this. I'll race pro. It fixed that problem, and also created a lot of other problems. Again, like, I think there's a theme here. Like, I just jump into things that I wasn't entirely ready for. And that year, 2014, I was like pretty much close to dead last in like every pro race that I did. Not quite. I remember in Durango, it was a big mountain enduro in Durango, I think I only beat someone who got a flat. And I was talking to one of the other women, and like someone I really admire, and I was like pretty bummed. And I was like, I don't think I should be racing pro. And she looked at me and was like, you are exactly where you need to be. And I remember thinking, you're nuts. Like, I shouldn't be here. I don't belong here. And I think she was totally right. You know, I wasn't, and I think at the time I thought she was saying, oh, you belong in racing pro. But I think she was saying, like, you're doing what you need to do to get there. And I was. Like, I did it the hard way. I think I don't recommend just like deciding you're a pro racer, doing it. Like, that's kind of insane. That said, it worked for me. I was able to take that frustration with not getting results and channel it into working really hard and doing everything I could to be a better athlete and actually belong there. And that's not to say that I wasn't very discouraged a lot of the time and that I always had a good attitude, because I really, like, that was really not the case for that year. I was really not happy and frustrated with my performance and etc. But at the same time, I did what I needed to do. I got through it. I had a lot of incredible learning experiences, and excuse me. By the time I came back to racing in 2015, I was by no means done struggling. I still am not, but was able to get on some podiums at the Scott Enduro Cup and like start to feel like, okay, like I'm not the fastest pro, but I do belong here. That year I was able to be, so 2015, I was able to be part of MACKY's team with Pivot. So I got bikes, which was nuts for a second year racer, but I was also doing a lot of social media and writing stuff, so that sort of helped that along. And then it kind of went from there. Mackie and I ended up signing a contract with Jameis for 2016. So I had only been racing for 2 years when I signed with Jameis and was suddenly making money as a professional athlete. This is like pretty... There's like a certain amount of pressure that goes with that for sure. And I think I struggled with that in 2016 for sure. And 2017 as well, to be honest. I really struggled with feeling like I belonged at these races and that I could ever be successful. And I was improving every year, but like so was everyone else. And I always felt like pretty much until this year, like I was behind the curve. I think that's a very natural human way to feel when you're doing something that pushes you. It wasn't always pleasant, but I did stick with it. And so I guess that's the answer to how did I get here. Pretty much just kept trucking along. Yeah. So really the past 3 years since I started working with Jameis have really been a blur and a dream, and also like really hard. I've been able to race my bike in South America, in New Zealand, in Australia and in Europe as well. And that has really been a lot of insane opportunities. And I am incredibly grateful to be where I am today. And recording this video has been an interesting exercise in seeing how, like, you know, there are no guarantees. I think when I do think about how I got here, I'm often like, man, I wish I had dedicated myself to that earlier. Like, you know, I did start mountain biking really young, but I didn't really train or do any sort of serious racing, especially didn't do any serious technical riding until 2014, basically. So I do sometimes, I'm like, man, I wish I had really started that earlier. But at the same time, I am just really grateful to have had the opportunities that I have and to have more bike racing opportunities in the future for next year, and also really grateful to be doing YouTube now and to have this as a way to kind of tell the story, and to also be able to share that with all of you, that the experiences that we do have, because it's been a pretty incredible couple of years. So I think I'm gonna wrap that up there. Got a few more seconds to get your last questions in the chat. And in case you forgot when I talked about this at the beginning, this video was suggested by our Patreon team. So if you want to suggest future videos or live streams or premieres, whatever, head on over to Patreon. Our support starts as low as $1. We really appreciate everyone who has taken the time to check out our Patreon and supported us. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a goal of hitting 310 patrons by the end of the year, because that'll be one patron per day since we started Patreon in February. And if we hit that goal, we will print an awesome, totally more awesome custom sticker for everyone who is a patron at the end of December. So if you are not and you are interested in supporting us, head over that way now. I think we will wrap up this premiere. We will be back, I think, yeah, so the week before Thanksgiving, we will be back and we're gonna try to do a live stream. We have to see how the internet is going to be there. We'll be at my parents' house for Thanksgiving in Ohio. So I think we might be able to do a live stream. That would be awesome. And I think it'd be a really good time to do it because we are so thankful for all of you. So stay tuned for news on that. We usually post when we're doing these premieres and lives on our Instagram, instagram.com/SYDMACKY. So make sure you're following us there for some more live time updates. And in the meantime, thank you for watching this. I realize this got really long. I guess I like talking about myself. Appreciate you all for sticking in there, and we will catch you next time. In the meantime, you know what to do. Be more awesome.